It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Yeah, baby. We are back at 500 and it feels like magic, doesn't it? The New York Mets win back-to-back games after getting their asses kicked on Friday night against the Pittsburgh Pirates. It's odd. This is not the end of the series. It's a 4-game series. It's a wraparound affair, which the Mets are also going to do in a couple of weeks against the Marlins. But I figured we would give you your traditional Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, Monday morning Rico, even if this series hasn't concluded. Now, it may feel like the Mets have won 2 out of 3. It may feel like they've won this series, but they do have to complete the deal on Monday afternoon. We will give you a Rico Brogna sometime Monday night as well, recapping that game and looking ahead to the final homestand before the All-Star break. We are recording this, I would say, about 4 to 5 hours after the finale, not the finale. See, I already screwed up. It's such a weird thing to have a series continue on a Sunday. We are recording this about 4 to 5 hours after the conclusion of Sunday afternoon's game. And so I've had a little bit of time to let this marinate in my brain. But even just 4 and 5 hours removed from that game, let me say that in this moment, that feels like the best freaking victory of the year. And I think a part of what makes a game a great win versus, oh, that was a good win, versus a okay win is how you would feel if you lost. And if the Mets would have lost that game, and it appeared like they were going to multiple times, but if the Mets had lost that Sunday game to Pittsburgh, think about how we would feel. They would be 2 games under 500. That's number one. Number two, all the good feelings from the OMG concert would now be cited as, hey, this is their record since the concert, which, if I'm not mistaken, would have been 3-6. Also, it just would have felt like a kick in the you-know-what to have the Mets get a big run in the 8th inning on a clutch hit by Brandon Nimo, who's been clutch all year, to have, and we'll break this down in more specifics, to have the questionable maneuvering of Carlos Mendoza in going to Edwin Diaz early, to have Diaz, I don't want to say implode, but sort of implode, a 4-pitch walk, a first pitch 2-run single, to lose that game, especially when they then put the first 2 guys on base against Aroldis Chapman in the 9th inning, and then it looks like they're just going to get mowed down. I think the feelings of negativity would have been so high if they didn't win this game. And to come back and win the way they did, the incredible at-bats they had against Chapman in the 9th inning, Diaz coming back for the bottom of the 9th and actually giving us a stress-free 1-2-3 inning. I think when you combine all that crap together, that's as good of a win as you're going to have. Now, the beauty of this, and the reason I say that, is because coming up in about a week, the Mets are going to have the All-Star break. We're all going to have the All-Star break. But we are not going to have an All-Star break on Rico Brogna. We're going to have a bunch of new podcasts, including ranking the best wins of the season and ranking the worst losses of the season. And this game on Sunday against Pittsburgh on June 7th, 2024, to me, for my money, we'll see if my view changes in a week when I have more time to think about it, goes right up at the top of the list. If you think I'm crazy, or if you agree with me, or if there are other games that to you are the best wins of the year or the worst losses of the year, you can email us. We want your opinion when we put that podcast together. So you can email us to ricob@gmail.com, or you can leave us a voicemail, 725-222-8699. Now let's get back to this game and the feeling of this game. So I did what a lot of red-blooded Americans do on a Sunday afternoon. I went to an outdoor party where kids were involved. And it was hot and it was disgusting. And so I started this game at about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I had one of those bugaboos that occurs with DVR. Something got spoiled. So as I'm beginning this game, for some reason, my iPad, which I have to fix, this has never happened before, on its kind of like screen before you swipe up to like unlock it. I guess that's what it's called. On the unlock or the lock screen, it had the score of the freaking game. But the only thing I saw was a big fat donut next to the Mets. That's all I saw. So now I'm thinking, wait a second, I'm an hour and a half into this game, maybe 2 hours as I'm starting it, because I'm starting it at about 3 o'clock. Game started at 1:30, 3:30, 3:30. Now I'm doing the math. Like, if they haven't scored a run, what is this? Are we losing 5-0 in the 8th inning? So I begin watching this game. And this is a weird way to watch a baseball game because I did not see how many runs the Pirates had. Okay, my eyes quickly diverted away. I am watching this baseball game knowing we can't give up a run because I know we don't have any. I don't know how deep into this game we are. So when Sean Manaea walks the leadoff hitter to start this game, I'm thinking we're screwed. I mean, geez, we're done. But Sean Manaea, I give him a lot of credit because as shaky as he was in the first inning, think about how Manaea starts this game. He walks the leadoff hitter, instantly gets a double play, great. He walks Connor Joe and then gets Nick Gonzalez to fly out. He then commits his own error when on that ground ball to first base, he isn't even late getting over there. He just can't kick first base and then makes the mental mistake of not realizing that after missing first base, Brian Hayes had turned and all he had to do was tag him out and he would have gotten a reprieve. And he's too busy looking like confused at Marvin Hudson. Sean, what are you confused about? If you're the guy covering at first base and you missed first base, aren't you the one that knows you missed first base? Like, if you felt your foot kick the base, I could understand being perturbed by the call. But you didn't. You would feel it if you did. So Sean Manaea is walking the first 2 of 3 hitters. He's committing this horrible error and mental error. So I almost think it's like 2 errors in one. And then immediately throws a wild pitch. But showed great poise getting out of that second inning. And imagine if you're watching this game, not just being a negative Met fan, but thinking we cannot give up a run because I already know the Mets aren't scoring runs for at least 6 or 7 innings. That almost made Sean Manaea's performance even more impressive in my dumb brain. Got good defense from Mark Vientos. And then after that second inning, we saw Sean Manaea, who's had a very good, underrated season for this team, really kick it in a high gear. Pitched incredibly well. Got a big strike out of Andrew McCutchen when he ran into trouble in the 5th inning. Had a clean 1-2-3 6th inning, which included a great diving play by Brandon Nimo. The Met defense, besides the Manaea error that he made, was awfully good. I thought Mark Vientos had a great game at third base. Jeff McNeil made a good play in left field on that base hit by Joey Bart, in which he quickly got to the baseball that hit the jetted stands and makes the very good throw to second base. Jose Iglesias, by the way, is just chef's kiss defensively at second base. Very, very flashy. I know that pissed off Keith Hernandez on that double play in the 1st inning when Iglesias kind of like flips it to Lindor. I didn't even flip it to Lindor. Basically flips it to second base, and Lindor darts in and makes the play. Very flashy play, but he is so smooth at second base. He is so smooth to the point where whether it's McNeil in left field or McNeil in right field or McNeil not playing, Jose Iglesias, and I know I've said this before, this is a broken record comment, but I'll say it again because I believe it for many reasons. Jose Iglesias has to play every day. And he did remind us that late in the game with the at-bat against Chapman, which we'll get to. But let me continue giving flowers to Sean Manaea, who gives you the 6 scoreless innings, throws the 89 pitches. I'll tell you why I wasn't against Mendy taking him out. Spoiler alert, there are going to be things that we're going to discuss that Mendy did that I don't like. But in this case, the reason I didn't mind it is because Sean Manaea has already shown us he is, even on his good days, a 5-6 inning pitcher. Now, granted, in his last start, he went 7, but for the most part, he is an 85, 90 pitch kind of guy. And sometimes when you get 6 good innings out of a guy like him, instead of pressing your luck by saying, let me try to squeeze out a 7th inning out of him, I think sometimes you say, you know what? Golf clap, let me get you out of this game. You also have a bullpen that, while we don't love it, is sort of refreshed. Refreshed to the point where nobody had to pitch Friday because of the blowout. And so you have yourself, for the most part, a very well-rested bullpen. And nobody pitched the day before either because they got the strong outing from Quintana, and it was only Adrian Hauser. So you really have your full complement of relievers that you can use. So I was not against pulling Sean Manaea after 6 innings. By the 7th inning, I'm looking at the clock thinking, wait a second. Is this where I saw the Mets at 0 runs? It's funny when Francisco Alvarez had that Mike Piazza-like double in the 7th inning. And I'll tell you, the way he hits line drives to right center field, that's why I say Mike Piazza. I'm not trying to tell you he's going to be better or Francisco's going to go down as the greatest hitting catcher of all time. He certainly has a long way to go. But in terms of the power he has to right field, it does remind you, at least reminds me, of Mike Piazza. But when Alvarez hit that double, now I'm playing the mental gymnastics of, can they score the run here? Or when I got the spoil that they're at 0 runs, where am I at in the game? Either way, it worked out. Either way, it was fine. Reed Garrett, let's get to him. So he comes into the 7th inning. First of all, I was confused on why Mendy went to Reed Garrett. And I'll give you the reason why I was curious. Reed Garrett the day before threw 25, 26 pitches. Dednell Nunez, who I think we'd all agree is the Mets' best reliever, and he got screwed in this game, which we'll get to. Why not go to your best reliever? Especially because Dednell Nunez barely pitched yesterday, or by yesterday, I mean Saturday's game. If I can get a quick 7th out of Nunez, maybe he comes out for the 8th inning. I don't know if I have to use Reed Garrett as well. Reed Garrett had an inning in which I cursed him out a million times. I'm sure everybody did. He gets ahead of Ke'Bryan Hayes 0-2. He can't get Ke'Bryan Hayes to bite on that splitter. Basically, nobody is biting on 0-2 splitters from Reed Garrett anymore. Early this season, he was getting swing and misses all the time. Now, if he isn't walking the ballpark like he did against Houston, he's getting ahead of hitters and then just not being able to put guys away. And, credit to Ke'Bryan Hayes. He did have a 10-pitch at-bat. He hits that ball to right center field for a base hit. And I thought we're screwed. This is where my negativity came in. And not just being because I'm a negative Met fan. It's not that. It's the moment. It's Reed Garrett. It's not believing in him, especially after the base hit. He falls behind O'Neal Cruz 2-0. And it looks like here we go again. Now, credit to Reed Garrett. Also, thank you to O'Neal Cruz. He battles him and strikes him out, and then shockingly gets Rowdy Tellez to ground into that double play. Reed Garrett ends up putting together a nice, scoreless, walkless, which was stunning, inning in the 7th inning. So kudos to Reed Garrett, but I'm being honest, my confidence level was not very high after that 10-pitch war with Ke'Bryan Hayes. With that said, same issue. He's not getting nearly as many swing and misses as he was getting earlier this season, and he continues to have this problem of putting guys away. Now, you go to the 8th inning. The 8th inning was a very weird inning because when you get a one-out single from Jose Iglesias, and I didn't have a problem with him trying to steal. I got no issue with that, doing it against the great former Met Colin Holderman, which just reminds us of Daniel Vogelbach, and then reminds us of Billy Epler, and reminds us that despite Holderman's struggles in this game, can we not use Colin Holderman? But no, we had to deal him for Daniel Vogelbach in one of those just horrendous trades. Like the Darren Ruff trade. I know Darren Ruff was less productive. There's nobody in that trade as of now who's coming back to bite us in terms of, oh my, we could use him. But in the Daniel Vogelbach trade, considering the Mets' desperation for relievers, and that was one of those trades. I'm sorry to harp on that, but I have to for a minute before we get to the rest of this game. That's one of those trades that in the moment I didn't like. Sometimes there are trades where in the moment you like it, and then you realize, oh, that didn't work out. And vice versa. Obviously, vice versa, where I hate a trade and it works out beautifully. When they made the Holderman-Vogelbach trade, I remember saying this on the Fan. I don't know, were we doing? Yeah, we were doing the Rico at the time. Absolutely. Trade deadline 2022, the heart of the early days of Rico Brogna. So I've definitely said it here, and you could go through the archives, but why would you? I mean, that's just a waste of time. You really have no life if you're going into the archives of Rico Brogna to hear my opinion initially on the Daniel Vogelbach trade. So just trust me when I say this. I didn't mind acquiring Vogelbach. I wasn't anti-Daniel Vogelbach. I was why did they have to trade a reliever on their roster for a July 31st edition? Now, we've talked about that possibly being something that happens this year, where you've got two contenders making deals with each other. But in 2022, as the Mets are on their way to a 100-win season, most of the teams are making deals in which they're trading a B-level prospect for a player that can help, especially on the level of Daniel Vogelbach. The fact that the Mets couldn't find something in their farm system, because it's different if they had traded a reliever we had never heard of, who 2 years later became decent. I wouldn't be bitching about it. I wouldn't even be talking about it right now and say, yeah, that trade didn't work out. You never know when you trade prospects. This was a guy on the roster, on the team, helping them. Whatever. I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's my fault for bringing it up. Anyhow, the Mets rocked Colin Holderman. I mean, that's the good news. Lindor draws that walk, an innocuous 2-out, nobody on walk after Iglesias gets caught stealing. And then Brandon Nimo. And I know that the commissioner doesn't look at this, that the other players who are voting for the All-Star game don't look at this. I'm sure nobody looks at this except for us as the stupid Met fans. But Brandon Nimo, in clutch situations, however you want to define it, you want to define it as late and close, you want to define it with just runners in scoring position, you want to define it as 2 outs and runners in scoring position, however you want to define those numbers, Brandon Nimo has been an ass kicker. In fact, you want to hear some numbers for Brandon Nimo? I'll give it to you, in case you think I'm lying. 2 outs and runners in scoring position. Brandon Nimo leads the team in RBIs with 15, hitting .414 with a 12-18 batting average. That's with 2 outs and runners in scoring position. If you just want your traditional runners in scoring position statistics, Brandon Nimo is hitting .347 with a 1,079 OPS and 35 RBIs. I don't want to put anybody down, but just compare that to, let's say, Francisco Lindor, 234, 740 OPS, or Pete Alonso, 224, 734 OPS. I'm not putting them down. I'm merely saying Brandon Nimo, despite there being moments this season where he was frustrating, has been an incredibly clutch player for this team all year long, and the numbers back it up. And he smokes that RBI double, and I pop out of my chair with my brain also thinking, can they score a run? When was I spoiled on the 0? Send them! Send them! Send them! That's what I'm screaming at the TV. My wife is downstairs. She was concerned. Send them! And then O'Neal Cruz can't catch the throw in from the left fielder. There will be no throw to the plate, and the Mets take a 1-0 lead. And boy, did that feel good. It felt good because rallies that come out of nowhere feel good. It felt good because I knew the spoiler of the Mets having not scored a run is now dead and gone because I just saw the Mets score a run. And it felt good because this game, as long as it went at 0-0, felt bigger and bigger and bigger. This felt like one of those games, and I've said this many times before, that feel just a little bit bigger than the others. There are some in the 162 that are just a little bit bigger for a variety of reasons. And I think putting together a 2-game winning streak on the heels of a 3-game losing streak, yeah, that feels big. And they grabbed that 1-0 lead. Now, Pete Alonso can't come through with a big hit after J.D. Martinez walks, but it's 1-0 Mets. And now I'm starting to think about that stat that had been popped up over the last few days, that the Mets are the only team in Major League Baseball that hasn't shut out an opponent. And up 1-0 in the 8th inning with Dednell Nunez coming in, it's in the back of my mind. Can they pull this off? So let's go through this 8th inning because, quite frankly, Dednell Nunez got screwed. All right? He really did. He gives up the leadoff hit to Jack Sawinski. Okay. He gets the gift from the gods that Michael Taylor's trying to bunt 3 times in a row and bunts a foul ball on 0-2. Super. Andrew McCutchen hits a little blooper for a base hit, and now our boy, Dednell Nunez, is being tested. Big spot. 1-0 game. 2 on, 1 out. The Pirates' best hitter, their all-star, Brian Reynolds, comes to the plate. And Gary Cohen was so what's that word when you say so? Poetic. There you go. Gary Cohen was so poetic because I think it was right before Nunez threw the 3-2 slider to Brian Reynolds. He said, one thing about Dednell Nunez is he doesn't give in. And he stuck with that slider. It was out of the strike zone, but Brian Reynolds chased it. And Dednell Nunez reacted. Animalistic excitement on that strikeout of Brian Reynolds. As soon as he gets it, I'm thinking, all right, deep breath. You got to get one more. I hated Mendy coming to the mound to bring in Diaz. And I say that, and I wish I could go back in time. This is why maybe one of these days we do have to do like a live game Rico, like almost do a show during a game and talk about the game the entire time. Because I would have given you for 2.5 minutes before Diaz came back on the mound and did anything, my dissertation on why I hated this. Now, I heard what Mendy said after the game, and for those that didn't, I'll summarize it like this. Mendy said, he's our guy. He's our best reliever. He even threw in the line of, I've told you, if we're going to go where we want to go, we need Edwin Diaz. By the way, I agree with if you're going to go where this team wants to go and we want them to go, you're going to need Edwin Diaz. I'm playing the Edwin Diaz bobblehead trumpet right now. I agree. Okay, I'm with you on that. But in the 8th inning with 2 outs, with a reliever that we still believe in, that has shown guts, that has made the bid pitch when he's needed to, I didn't love taking him out. Like, if this was reversed and it was Reed Garrett who just got a big strikeout of Brian Reynolds, everything we've seen from Reed Garrett over the last couple of weeks, I'd say, fine, go to your best reliever or go to the guy that you believe will be your best reliever. Because pound for pound this season, he has not been their best reliever. But I understand reputation, and I understand need for him to morph back into that guy. If it was Adam Ottavino, fine, go to Edwin Diaz. I am normally a big believer in use your best pitcher, your best reliever in the biggest spot of the game. And with 2 on and 2 out, up by a run in the 8th inning, I'm telling you, 90% of times, I'd say this is a great move. I love the guts. I love the balls. I don't love it here because Edwin Diaz is not fully back to being Edwin Diaz. At least this is my thought for the 2.5 minutes in which Diaz is coming into the game and replacing Nunez. But a lot of this was about Nunez. A lot of this is about him. He just struck out Brian Reynolds in a huge spot. He didn't get smoked when he gave up the big hits. He wasn't giving up laser beams all over the place. He wasn't walking the ballpark. He deserved the opportunity to get through the inning. That's really what it came down to. If this is late August, mid-September, and we're talking about a different Edwin Diaz, and maybe we've got more data points on Dednell Nunez and struggles, I could offer you a very different opinion. In this moment, I thought Nunez deserved the opportunity to go get Joshua Palacios and get out of this freaking inning. And instead he goes to Edwin Diaz. Now, this is before Edwin Diaz does anything. I'm being perfectly honest with you about how I felt. And he freaking walks Palacios on 4 pitches. Ugh. 4 pitches. All of them outside, basically. I think all of them were either fastballs or sliders that were just off the plate. And then, yeah, Nick Gonzalez doesn't hit the ball 110 miles an hour, but a first pitch, 2-run single to give the Pittsburgh Pirates the lead. Oh, brutal. It felt like 2019. It felt like 2019, not because Edwin Diaz was just so bad in 2019. It felt like 2019 because when I think back to that year, it's been 5 years now. The only thing that comes to mind is how many games the Mets blew that they shouldn't have lost. I think about all the games that they left on the table. And if they win half of those games, they're a wild card team, maybe not the Nationals, and who knows what happens. This season, even though it hasn't necessarily happened recently, though it kind of has when you look at 5-run leads and 6-run leads being blown, so I should take that back. It has happened recently. They've had way too many games that they've completely blown. And this felt like one of them. And that's why in that moment, even after Diaz gets bailed out on the great defensive play by Harrison Bader. Let's not forget that, because Brian Hayes rips a ball to center field. This game could get far worse. As Edwin Diaz is walking off the mound, this felt like it was going to go on that list of worst losses of the season. And then you have the ninth inning. And there are so many things to wax poetic about in that ninth inning. Let us start off with the forgotten man himself. The guy whose at-bat to start the ninth inning has caused me to go on Mets.com and start ordering my Francisco Alvarez jersey. He is going to be the first guy since Jake to get a schmuck like me to drop $120 or whatever it is and get that Alvarez jersey, because quite frankly, I'm in love. I am head over heels in love with Francisco Alvarez. And there are certain things that are obvious. The power to right field, we talked about that earlier, reminding you of Mike Piazza. His ability to get the big hit, the clutchness that he's had so far this season. Runners in scoring position hitting .316 this year and .992 OPS. You could even talk about the obvious ERA difference when Francisco is catching. It's a part of why he needed to be out there for Sean Manaea. The splits are ridiculous when Francisco Alvarez is catching. All that is nice and obvious. But I think what has put me over the top, that has put me madly in love with Francisco Alvarez, are those at-bats. Because when Francisco Alvarez first came up, he was a hacker. He was not looking to walk. And I'm not suggesting he's looking to walk now, but he wasn't giving you those wars, those at-bats that are like, it'll take a lot out of you. And he has a ton of them now. I mentioned, going back to that Yankee series a week earlier, that his at-bat against Garrett Cole early was the at-bat that changed the game. We'll go to the ninth inning. See, there is something that's been said. Pete actually said it to me. I don't want to pick on Hoff. Sean Morash said it, even though he's probably just trolling. But I've heard a few people bring up, well, that's a Aroldis Chapman, man. He does this. He melts down. Look, Aroldis Chapman is not a guy I want on my team, and he does melt down. All that's true. If you watch this ninth inning, ask yourself this. Did he melt down, or did the Mets melt his ass? Because I'd argue the New York Mets melted his ass. And what I mean by that is Aroldis Chapman threw strike one to everybody. Aroldis Chapman was ahead of guys. Aroldis Chapman was a pitch away from putting almost everybody away. And whether it was Francisco Alvarez, or it was Harrison Bader, or it was Jose Iglesias, you name it, the Mets battled him. They fought him. Chapman didn't melt down if you watched it. Now, maybe we have a difference in terms of meltdowns. Like, to me, a meltdown is he walked Alvarez on 4 pitches. A meltdown is he couldn't find the strike zone. But that at-bat to start the ninth inning by Francisco Alvarez set the entire tone for that inning. And I know it didn't win them the game, because there's certainly at-bats later that won them the game. But I just want to give him major, major credit for the tone-setting at-bat that started the ninth inning. And same goes with Harrison Bader. Look, Harrison Bader is another one of those guys that's been clutch all year long. 306, 840 OPS with runners in scoring position. Now, granted, this at-bat wasn't with runners in scoring position, but it set the whole inning up. Works the count to 3-2, base hit to center field. Mark Vientos, I don't know what he was looking for on 3-2. Luis Torrens, pinch hitting for Jeff McNeil. I don't know what he was looking for on 0-2. By the way, let's not gloss over that. Pinch hitting Jeff McNeil with Luis Torrens, 1,000% spot on move. I know it's a limited amount of at-bats that Torrens has had, but he's earned that moment against Aroldis Chapman. Jeff McNeil has not. He was 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts. He made a great play in left field. Kudos to him for that. But quite frankly, that to me was a no-brainer managerial move. But nevertheless, I give him credit for it, even if I think it's no-brainer-ish, because sometimes things that are no-brainers don't normally happen. With that said, love the move. Torrens couldn't get the bat off the shoulder. With 2 on and 2 out, This game was now being elevated into another level of bad loss. From being shut out to the 8th, to the Diaz, Deadnell Nunez decision, to now the tease of you get the first two guys on base, and you got back-to-back guys looking at strike 3, and then you have Jose Iglesias. Another one of those at-bats. Similar to Francisco Alvarez. The Pirates and Chapman are a strike away numerous times, and I love the way Iglesias responded to ball 4 as well. Soto-like in terms of how pumped up he was. And during that entire at-bat, and I guess this is a testament to Francisco Lindor and the way I feel about him, and the way maybe most of us feel about him, I kept saying, just find a way to get on base. Just get me to Lindor. Get me to Lindor. Because there was a feeling, at least I had, and maybe you had it. See, this is where I'm positive. I'm not just straight positive or straight negative. Different situations, different players, different emotions will elicit that. Get me to Francisco Lindor. And Francisco Lindor, and this is why today, and we'll get into the All-Star decision, this is why the All-Star decision pisses off a lot of Met fans, because no offense to Pete, we all like Pete, we all love Pete. Francisco Lindor, even if the runners in scoring position numbers don't back it up, even if the 2 outs with runners in scoring position don't back it up, your eyes have told you how clutch Francisco Lindor has been this season. And that was as clutch as it gets. A 2-run single against Aroldis Chapman to flip the score and give him a lead. And now, as soon as they do that, the question is, what do you do in the 9th inning? Now, obviously, the hope is you could break the game open. J.D. Martinez didn't, but the hope is J.D. rips a double up the alley. They got a big lead. Maybe the decision isn't that difficult. So, I'll be honest. I didn't want to go to Edwin Diaz in the 8th inning. I turned out to be right. Here's where I was wrong. I did not want Edwin Diaz pitch in the 9th inning. For 2 reasons. Reason number 1, the layoff. I don't know how he's going to respond to the fact he hasn't thrown a ball in 25 minutes. That was an incredibly long 9th inning. Aroldis Chapman threw 40 pitches, and then there was a pitching change. So it was a long amount of time of Edwin Diaz not pitching. That's number 1. And number 2, I didn't trust Edwin Diaz. Think about how bad that 8th inning was when he came in. A 4-pitch walk, a 2-run single, and then Harrison Bader made a diving catch to save him. I mean, you have confidence in that? I certainly didn't. So despite Adam Ottavino not being a guy any of us love, I preferred that, even against the 3 left-handed hitters they were going to face. I couldn't bring myself to say Jake Diekman, the only lefty in the bullpen. I couldn't do that. I mean, Jose Budo, I don't know if they would use him back-to-back days, so that one's probably not in. But I probably would have gone to Ottavino. I admit that. With that said, I think this may be one of the most important aspects of this win, and that is the fact that Edwin Diaz pitched a 1-2-3 inning. And that his response to the confidence that Carlos Mendoza had in him, the reprieve that Edwin Diaz was given, he was given a reprieve in this game by coming back out, getting a clean 9th inning with a 1-run lead, and to respond the way he did, that was huge. Hopefully that leads to Edwin Diaz not blowing any more saves. That would be the hope. But I thought that was that response that he had by pitching a nice, easy 1-2-3 inning against 3 left-hand hitters, lefties he has struggled against this season, I thought was a wonderful sign. And as a part of why that victory was so freaking important. And it was so important because after they lost that finale to Washington, on the heels of blowing a 5-run lead the day before, they respond on Friday night by Luis Severino having another one of those kind of mediocre performances, gets off to a good start, makes the big pitch when he has to, and then throws freaking batting practice with Tellez and Sawinski and Reynolds. And all of a sudden, the Mets have a 2-0 lead, not quite a 5-0 lead, and they're down 4-2. And then things get very, very worse in the 7th inning. I mean, who cares? The bullpen imploded. They lost 14-2. At that point, it doesn't matter. What mattered was the Mets couldn't hit. They couldn't take advantage of some opportunities they had early in this game. And Luis Severino was very, very mediocre. And when the Mets lose that game on Friday night, 14-2, and they have a 3-game losing streak, and now you have the whole, well, what's their record since the concert? How they been doing since the concert? They're 2-5. Here we go. It was very important for this team to respond. Friday night, on the heels of Thursday, was an ugly, ugly day. It was ugly because the offense, which got shut down a day earlier, and you want to blame it on the start time, you want to blame it on Jake Irvin putting it all together, whatever you want to blame it on, the facts are the facts, they got shut out. And they responded by scratching out 2 measly runs against Paul Skeens, even though Paul Skeens does look very, very good. I think what really bothered me was they didn't do anything after that. Like, they had a chance to kind of knock Skeens around early. They drove up his pitch count. There was a big error by the second baseman, Nick Gonzalez, and they just couldn't take advantage of it, especially in that 4th inning. When Pete Alonso got that leadoff double, and they had a runner on second, nobody out, and they're up 1-0, and then Francisco Alvarez gets hit by a pitch, caused all of us to, like, die inside thinking he's going to be hurt. That had a chance to be the knockout blow. They couldn't do it. So the Mets had put together, I think it was like a 22, 23-inning run where they'd only scored 2 runs. And then you pile it together with the bullpen imploding and making it an embarrassment, and, you know, Luis Torrens having to come into the game. It just, like, think about how you felt Friday into Saturday about this team. Probably thinking the magic's gone. The OMG magic's gone. The, what's the character? Grimace is gone. I've already forgot his name. It was just kind of a, I don't know, a feeling of, hey, maybe everything we saw for a month just meant nothing. And what I thought was really important and remains important was not that the Mets had to continue to play at that clip, but they had to stabilize. And when you lose the last 2 to Houston, you lose the last 2 to Washington, the opener to Pittsburgh, and you pile all that together. And when you really think about it, it may not be the end of the world. You've lost 5 out of 7. Okay, it happens. But you couldn't let it turn into something worse. And that's why I thought responding on Saturday the way they did, and then obviously the win on Sunday, I thought was huge. As far as Saturday is concerned, how about Luis Torrens? Luis Torrens, you know, Hoff, you should apologize to Luis Torrens. I think it was at the end of the last podcast we did. We very, very quickly, briefly talked about the trade deadline. And Hoff said, you think we should get a better backup catcher? And I'm like, well, you know, you always look to improve, but what's wrong with Luis Torrens? What's wrong with Luis Torrens, Pete?
First of all, what's wrong with your impersonation? That was terrible. That's how I sound? Oh, my God. Here's the thing is, first of all, Saturday was depressing because if it wasn't for Torrens, how many people we leave on base the first few innings? It was gross. I could not stand watching that game yesterday because I was so frustrated. Yes, he came through. I'm very happy about that. But on the other hand, too, like, I was thinking more of if Alvarez is not going to be seeing regular time around behind the dish and Torrens is going to have to catch or backup's going to have to catch, I want someone that's going to be able to mimic his defensive strategy so that the pitchers can feel comfortable. And Torrens doesn't do that.
Well, right now, I don't think anybody does it. I mean, that's the beauty of Francisco Alvarez. I mean, a lot of guys in this rotation, Sean Manaea being prime example, are just different pitchers. And it's not picking on Luis Torrens specifically. Look at Tomas Nido. Look at Omar Narvaez. I mean, the Mets have had other catchers on this roster, and the common denominator is that none of them bring out the best in pitching the way Francisco Alvarez does. What Torrens has been able to do, to the point where he's used as a pinch hitter. I mean, think about that. If you're using your backup catcher as a pinch hitter, it says a couple of things. One, it says something about the guy you're pinch hitting for, Jeff McNeil, but it also shows you a confidence in him. And you're right. You said something earlier. When you look at that game on Saturday, they got the first 2 guys on base to start that game. 2-1 and nobody out, and they got nothing. J.D. Martinez, Pete Alonso, Mark Vientos do nothing. They get the same situation, if not better, in the second inning, second and third, and nobody out, or a runner on second and 1 out, because they actually got a leadoff hit by Torrens, and then for some reason he's trying to steal second base, which made no sense. So they get a leadoff man on, and then a runner on second, 1 out, and they do nothing. And then in the third inning, They load the bases up. Bailey Falter comes out of the game because he's hurt. So you've got a cold reliever with the bases loaded and nobody out in a 1-0 count. And you got Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos coming up. And Pete strikes out, Vientos strikes out, and Luis Torrens bailed everybody out. Because that felt like maybe the worst first 3 innings you'll see. But Torrens hits one that's probably a grand slam at a lot of other ballparks. The bases clearing 3-run double. And that was the biggest hit of the game. Now, as far as David Peterson was concerned, David Peterson was not great. He battled in and out of trouble. He gave up the big home run to O'Neal Cruz. I was surprised that Mendy pulled him as quickly as he did. Did I love it? I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I was more like, wow, okay. Now, remember what the situation was. His pitch count was about 87, 88, so it was getting up there. 86 was when he was pulled. He gets the leadoff man out in the 5th and gives up a base hit. They're up 3-2. And you got Brian Hayes and Connor Joe coming up. So it didn't scream like a situation where David Peterson had to come out. But I think a lot of that also may have been, hey, I got Jose Butto. He's fresh. He can give me multiple innings. Let me deploy this new weapon. And he is a new weapon. Jose Butto changes this bullpen a little bit. Because I'll be curious to see how they continue to use him. I like using him in the multi-inning role, especially when you deal with a starting pitcher that can't get through the 5th inning, which the Mets are always going to get at least a turn through the rotation. Even if they get innings out of Sean Manaea, there may be a turn through the rotation where Quintana only gives you 4 or 5 innings. His last start was deep. But you're not getting through multiple turns where your starters are all giving you 6, 7 innings. Doesn't happen. So he deploys the Butto weapon. And how about that Butto weapon? Gets the 2 outs in the 5th, even though Peterson was a little sad. Gets through the 6th inning. And then hands it to the formula. The new formula for the New York Mets. Reed Garrett, Dednell Nunez, and Edwin Diaz. I didn't say it's the perfect formula, but it's the formula. Jose Iglesias came through with a big RBI double. Again, continuing to prove he needs to play every single day. And the Mets are able to hold on because they get a good effort from their pen. To their credit, Reed Garrett has a very, very, very shaky 7th inning. Gets a little bit lucky with Brian Hayes lining out with the bases loaded. But he gets through it. Dednell Nunez gives you a nice, easy 8th inning. Edwin Diaz gave you a clean 9th inning. That was a very, very important victory. And yes, I'm not going to ignore the blown call by Tom Payne with Jack Sawinski. That changed the Reed Garrett inning completely. No question. Jack Sawinski should have walked. It should have been a 5-3 game with the bases loaded and 2 outs and Nick Gonzalez coming up. Absolutely. It was a bad, bad call. If it went against us, we'd have spent 10 minutes on it. It went for us. I gave you 30 seconds. What do you want me to tell you? It's a bad call. I'm not going to apologize. It sucks. It'll go. We'll get one against us soon. Don't worry. There'll be plenty. But yes, it was the talk of baseball. It was the talk of anybody that watched the game. It was a game-breaking kind of call. Doesn't mean the Pirates definitely win. Doesn't mean the Mets definitely blow it. But look, there still is a pitch after that. Jack Sawinski can still hit a grand slam after that. He could line out. He could walk. He struck out. Kudos to Reed Garrett. And thank you to John Tumpane for giving us a call. Because trust me, I know, just like you know, just like we all know, there will be one, if not more, that go against us. But a very important victory on Saturday. You compile that with the win on Sunday, and it sets up the finale of this road trip. And if you rewind the tape to the beginning of this trip, 8 games against quote-unquote peer-tier teams, the Washington Nationals, the Pittsburgh Pirates. My goal, realistically, was 3 out of 4 and a split. And I framed it as 3 out of 4 against Washington, a split against Pittsburgh. Well, the Mets are a win away from doing the opposite. The split against Washington, 3 out of 4 against Pittsburgh. A 5-3 road trip is a major success. No matter what anybody tells you. The idea of going 7-1, it was never happening. 6-2, probably not happening. Just win games. And you know what? 4-4 wouldn't even be a disaster. I got to be honest with you. I kind of looked at it that way too. 5-3 or 4-4. And then, do your damage at home, where the Mets have still not done enough consistent damage. They are 21-25 at home. They have a 6-game homestand coming up against Washington and against Colorado. You know what? No more of this Mr. Nice Guy. They should go to the All-Star break at 500 at home, which means a 5-1 homestand. But on the road, 4-4, 5-3 is fine. Now, they're 4-3, so I'm certainly not going to go into the finale of this series Sunday afternoon and say, whatever, it's house money. I don't believe in house money. That's crap. But they have avoided this road trip from being a disaster. And I think there were many times over the course of this road trip where it felt like a disaster. Let me get to some of your emails, and we will get to the Pete Alonso All-Star bid. But let me start off with Negative Dan. Negative Dan has triggered me. He triggered me. Usually I read, sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree, but the subject line of his email today triggered me. He wrote, "Another Sunday salvage." Now, before I get to the rest of his email, are you effing kidding me? This isn't a Sunday salvage. A Sunday salvage was when they would lose the first 2 games of every freaking series and then win on a Sunday, and I'd come on the Rico and say, oh, gee golly, maybe they'll get hot now. That's a salvage. They just won back-to-back games. If you want to look at this as a 3-game series with an extra game on Monday, they just won 2 out of 3. Salvage. What are you talking about, salvage? Their road trip, which doesn't just start when they blow a 5-run lead, their road trip, which began Monday and has taken place for a full week now, they're 4-3. That's not a salvage. And look, if your implication is, well, the Nationals and the Pirates, you have to beat up on them. That to me was never realistic. Road games against teams that are 2 games worse than you? That's not like they have to go 7-1. So I'll read the rest of his email, but Dan, I expect you to apologize. I expect you to say, you know what, that's not really what I meant. I didn't mean a Sunday salvage. Now let's get to the rest of his email. Maybe I'll agree with it. Well, that was an absolute disaster that was avoided. Thank you, Aroldis Chapman, and I guess Francisco Lindor. I got to stop here. Okay, number one. Yes, it would have been a disaster to lose this game. Thank you to Aroldis Chapman. I completely disagree with that. And I said that earlier. Yes, Aroldis Chapman, if you're a Pirate fan, you're pissed off at him. The Mets took it from him. He's ahead of guys. The Mets are taking close pitches. They're fouling a million pitches off. This was not like Meltdown City. And you think Francisco Lindor? You're not sure if you should thank Francisco Lindor? He was on base 4 times. It's forgotten about because they didn't score a run. He had an 11-pitch at-bat in the 6th inning that ended with a double off the top of the fence. And yes, he had the 2-run single that avoided the disaster. So you don't think you're thanking Francisco Lindor. Thank him. Acknowledge him. Anyhow, can we stop putting DJ Stewart and Jeff McNeil in the same lineup? There you go. Now we're on the same page. Neither of them should even be playing anymore, let alone on the field at the same time. They bring down the entire offense when they are in there together, and the stats and records show it. I can't get them off this team fast enough. And then he included some factoids. The Mets are 26-37 with DJ Stewart this season. The Mets have a record of 38-43 with Jeff McNeil this season. I agree with you. I do not disagree with you on that. Jose Iglesias should be out there every day. I think that's the 5th time I've said that. And Tyrone Taylor has certainly earned the playing time for now in right field until Starling Marte comes back. Let's get to the Pete Alonso stuff. And I'll let Brian Smith author his opinion on the Alonso is an all-star debate that will go on. There is no defensible argument that has Pete Alonso in the all-star game over Brandon Nimo or Francisco Lindor. Pete Alonso is tied for 6th among NL first basemen in F WAR and tied for 6th on his own team. He's also the 4th worst player in Major League Baseball defensively by F WAR. Nimo is by far the most clutch performer on the team and likely should have been the Mets' lone selection. He included some stats. the F WAR for each team. F WAR means the Fangraphs version of WAR. Part of my issue with WAR is that it's not even one number. Baseball Reference has their calculation. Fangraphs has calculations. In fact, I'm going to debut the Evan WAR. The Evan WAR is coming out soon. That's right. WAR based on me and how I decide to rate these guys. Anyhow, the F WAR for Lindor is 3.3, 2.8 for Nimo, and a 1.2 for Alonso. High leverage OPS stats, which I kind of referred to earlier, but this will back me up. Nimo is at 1,240, Lindor 754, Alonso 750. Alonso seemed to suggest he would only take part in the Derby if he was selected to the All-Star game, so Rob Manfred went for the ratings. I'm not sure two Alonso stands, such as yourselves, can defend this selection in good conscience. Yes, as an Alonso stan, let's see how I'm going to respond. I'll put it this way, Brian, and I appreciate those numbers, and some of those numbers I look at and I agree with. Some of them my eyes disagree on, but that's a story for another day. There is no sane defense, and I love Pete, for Pete Alonso being the lone Mets All-Star representative. He's not. He shouldn't be. If we want to go through the determination of figuring out why he made it, I think Brian brings up a fair point that they want the home run derby to be an event. Pete Alonso is a character in this home run derby. And so, yeah, maybe Pete's on this team for that reason. Christian Walker, a first baseman for the Arizona Diamondbacks, defensively, offensively, you name it, has had a far better year than Pete Alonso. So despite first base not being the deepest position in the world, once you get past Bryce Harper and Freddie Freeman and Christian Walker, Matt Olson's had a down year. You look at the rest of the first basemen in the National League. Look, Pete Alonso is probably the fourth best first baseman in the National League this season, just basing on this season. No doubt about it. Freddie Freeman, Bryce Harper, Christian Walker. Christian Walker not making the team makes you say, what? Because my initial reaction when I saw Pete was the lone All-Star, and I'm not going to lie to you, and I love Pete, I was disappointed because I just don't think he earned it. I don't think he was an All-Star in the first half of this season. I saw his interview that he did after, and he was asked, what do you think of your first half? And I think Pete was right about some things. He's like, look, there are certain things I'm happy about. There's certain things that got to be better. He's certainly been more of a doubles machine than he was a year ago. He's cut down on the swing and misses compared to a year ago. His batting average is up from a year ago. So, yeah, there are certain things that are better. But we've talked about it. Pete has not had that sustained hot streak. He hasn't had that period where he has been a guy that you cannot face. Lindor has. Nimo has. Clutchness, Brandon Nimo takes the cake by far. In terms of overall performance, it's Francisco Lindor. And I do agree with Brian. If they had announced Lindor or Nimo, we would have talked about it. Maybe we would have debated it. But I think we would have ended the discussion by saying, look, you can't go wrong with either. For my money, it's Francisco Lindor. Despite all of those clutch numbers that we've given the bouquet to Brandon Nimo for, and he deserves it. He's been their most clutch player, pound for pound. But Lindor's also had more clutch moments than some of those numbers really show. He's also been a completely different player since he's been moved to the leadoff spot. We know about how good defensively he is. It's Lindor. Lindor's the Met All-Star. And I looked at the National League reserves to think, well, is there a position issue here? There isn't. Like Pete Alonso, all you need is one backup at each position. So once Freddie Freeman is there because Bryce Harper is there, you're just picking an all-star. It could have been an outfielder. It could have been a shortstop. Could have been a first. It didn't matter. So the position didn't matter, especially when you look at the guys that are on this roster. So, look, I'm not going to get crazy about it in terms of screaming and yelling. But obviously, look, I love Pete. I love the fact he's a career Met. I like his doofiness. I want him to be a Met forever. We'll talk more about that during the offseason. But I am not blinded. Have I really been blinded? We just have disagreements about the value of players. That's all it is. But I am certainly not blinded enough to sit here on the Rico and tell you he's an all-star. He's not an all-star. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, may I ask a simple question? Who gives a rat's ass?
Well, that's my biggest point is I don't care. It really doesn't make a difference who makes it. I just want to win. I want to go to the playoffs. I want to make a deep run, try to win a World Series. But I will say this much. I will make the case why Lindor is not the all-star for the Mets, just because you have to have the other side, I think. Dude, he had the worst 2 months of the season. He played terrible. And it was April really was awful, but May wasn't the best either. So you're going to give him an all-star nod because he had a great June. I mean, that's the same thing with Pete Alonso as well. It's none of them really deserve to be all-stars, in my opinion.
Well, it's so funny you say that. So let's also not forget the Mets need an all-star. And I remember the first time we talked about this was like early May. I made a joke. I was like, man, who would their one all-star be? And we talked about Luis Severino and Reed Garrett. Literally, those were the two names we mentioned. You may be right in terms of, at the end of the day, is anybody an all-star on the New York Mets? Maybe not. I mean, they're a 500 team, which is nice and fine, but you are right that Lindor got off to a terrible start. So did Brandon Nimo. Pete's been different in that his hot streaks have never been as hot as Nimo or Lindor, but he probably was also never he did have that one cold streak where he was like 0 for 25. So I don't know. I guess I would still say his valleys were never as valley-ish as some of the other players. But you may be right. Like if we didn't have that rule where each team needs a representative, maybe the Mets are completely shut out. But also, and look, for the younger listeners, the younger Ricos out there was a time in which I cared about this. There was a time in which I watched the All-Star game, and when the Met came on the field, there was a lot of pride and there was a lot of excitement. I don't want to minimize that to anybody who still feels that way. So when I say I don't give a rat's ass, that's me, the guy who's about to turn 41. But I fully understand and respect that there are still a lot of people out there, and they're not necessarily young, they could be old too, who are like, no, man, it's the All-Star game. It's a big deal. I've got to the point with the All-Star game, and we'll talk more about this next week, where I glance at it, but even as the baseball geek that I am, I need a break. And I think a part of that is because I watch so much. Take this Sunday afternoon. Yeah, I did a lot of stuff with my family, and then they knew at some point I'm coming home and I'm watching 9 innings of a Met game. So I watched so much baseball over the course of the regular season that I think the All-Star game and the All-Star break is a break for me and others. Let me get to a couple of your quick emails. We'll do a heavy email voicemail podcast on Monday night because I do want to keep to the tradition of doing a Rico after every series ends. This series obviously has not ended. So we will do one on Monday night, a little bit about the game. We'll preview the final homestand, and we'll read a lot of your emails. And if you have any thoughts, of course, you can email us to ricob@gmail.com and leave us a voicemail. This is Jose writing. Jose writes, guys, you claim Mendoza's done a great job. You can claim it all you want. But the guy can't manage a pen if his life depended on it. He can't wait to pull guys out for the next guy, and it has cost us constantly this season. And don't get me started on leaving starters way too long to squeeze an extra out from time to time. And lastly, he continues to go to guys that are not reliable like Jake Diekman and others. Love the pod. Be well. Jose, appreciate the email. I disagree with you. I think that the broad generalization of Carlos Mendoza does not work. If you listen carefully to all of our critiques of Carlos Mendoza, because I certainly don't blindly defend him. I mean, listen to this podcast. I've ripped him for a few moves. They're not consistently the same thing. And that's a compliment to him. So when you try to generalize, he keeps starters in too long, I'll counter with Saturday and David Peterson, or even Sunday with Sean Manaea. But there are days in which sometimes it's based on bullpen usage, sometimes it's based on other factors where he will push a starter too long. Sometimes he will be more aggressive at taking a reliever out. We saw this on Sunday when Nunez came out for Diaz. So I disagree. I don't think there's a good way to broadly generalize the way he handles bullpens. And I think that's actually a compliment. Secondly, guys you can trust. All right. The New York Mets have 8 guys in their bullpen. Jake Diekman is one of them. Dednail Nunez, Adrian Hauser, Jose Budo, Edwin Diaz, Reed Garrett, Adam Ottavino. Who do you trust? It's not like there's a long list of trustworthy bullpen arms. Right now, it's Edwin Diaz, Dednell Nunez, Reed Garrett, shaky, and Jose Budo. They need to add a lefty out of this bullpen. Let's see where they are standings-wise when we get to July 20th, July 25th. But for the sake of this team, for the sake of our brains as Met fans, we need to see them add a bullpen arm or two. I've got a whole list of guys they should target. We'll get to that coming up in the next couple of weeks. Anyhow, another Rico coming up Monday night. And then we'll get you set for this big homestand, the final homestand before the All-Star break. The Mets take on the Nationals for 3. They take on the Rockies for 3. You can always hit up the pod. We will read a lot of emails on the Monday night edition, the ricob@gmail.com, and we will get some of your voicemails. So leave us voicemails. We will play them, I promise, on Monday, 725-222-8699. Thank you very much for listening, subscribing, and downloading another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.